Emily Gardner thought she was marrying the love of her life, Daniel Reeves, but by sunrise, she was missing, and within days, the world would learn that the man she had trusted most was hiding a monstrous secret. Emily Gardner had spent years curating every detail of her life to perfection. From her boutique window displays to the pictures she posted online, everything she touched had a polished, dreamlike quality. At 28, she had built a small but thriving fashion business in her hometown of Ashfield, Oregon. The town loved her. She was the friendly face behind the counter, the voice cheering for local sports teams, the young woman who turned childhood sketches into a boutique empire. She wasn't just admired, she was adored. So, when she announced her engagement to Daniel Reeves, the town celebrated with her. Daniel wasn't from Ashfield, but he had settled there 2 years earlier to work remotely as a financial analyst. Quiet, polite, and always composed, he blended in well. He and Emily met through a charity event for local schools, and what started as a partnership quickly turned into a romance. While Emily was vibrant and outgoing, Daniel offered a calm and structured counterbalance. Friends described them as the ideal couple, two puzzle pieces perfectly matched. Their relationship moved quickly but seemed stable. Daniel supported Emily's work, often helping with inventory or running errands. He didn't seek attention but made sure to be by her side. To outsiders, their dynamic looked solid. So, when they set a wedding date less than a year after getting engaged, no one questioned it. The excitement was contagious. Emily picked out a historic inn on the edge of town for the ceremony, surrounded by trees and old brick walls. It was picturesque, exactly the kind of setting that matched her style. The wedding itself was flawless. Guests arrived in spring attire, greeted by soft music and hand-painted welcome signs. Emily wore a custom gown she had designed herself, ivory satin with embroidered lace that shimmered in the late afternoon sun. Daniel stood at the altar in a sharp navy suit, his expression unreadable but calm. Vows were exchanged, rings placed, and the kiss sealed the moment. Flashbulbs flickered as they walked down the aisle together, a perfect match captured forever. The reception was lively. Speeches brought laughter and a few tears. The food was exquisite, and the dancing lasted for hours. Emily glowed with happiness, twirling across the dance floor as though the world couldn't touch her. Daniel smiled beside her, his movements more reserved but always in sync. By the end of the night, as the guests waved sparklers and wished them well, no one had any doubt that the couple was headed for a long, happy future. After the last guest had gone, the couple was driven to the inn's bridal suite. The staff remembered seeing them walk inside hand in hand. From that moment on, everything went quiet. Morning came, and the hotel staff prepared breakfast for the newlyweds. When hours passed and no one emerged, they knocked lightly on the door. No answer. Assuming the couple wanted privacy, they waited. But by noon, concern began to spread. The suite remained silent, the door locked, and calls went unanswered. It wasn't like Emily to miss a brunch she had planned herself. When hotel management finally entered using a master key, they found Daniel sitting alone at the edge of the bed. The room was eerily still. His wedding clothes from the night before were folded neatly on a chair, and Emily's bouquet sat wilting on the nightstand. Daniel looked dazed, as if he hadn't slept at all. He told them Emily had left during the night to take a walk and hadn't returned. His explanation was met with confusion. It was out of character for Emily to wander off, especially at night, and even more so to miss such an important morning. Friends began to arrive, first in concern, then in panic. Calls were made, and soon the police became involved. A missing person alert was issued. Volunteers scoured the surrounding woods and fields. Drones flew over the forest, while officers combed the area with dogs trained to pick up a scent. Social media buzzed with speculation, theories, and desperate pleas for information. Her boutique remained closed, its window display frozen in time. Flyers bearing her smiley photo were taped to storefronts, telephone poles, and car windows. The town watched in disbelief as their beloved bride remained missing. Daniel, meanwhile, stayed mostly out of sight. He made a few public appearances, one at the police station, another outside the hotel, where he stood trembling in front of news cameras, asking for her return. He spoke in a low voice, eyes downcast, hands twitching slightly. People pitied him at first. His bride was gone, and no one could imagine the grief he must have been feeling. But as the days passed, the pity began to fade. Something didn't feel right. Whispers started, small details that didn't add up. Neighbors began questioning his story. Emily's friends, once supportive, became distant. The town that had once embraced him now watched him with unease. No one could have guessed that behind the elegant wedding, the matching smiles, and the perfect photos was a night of betrayal so chilling it would unravel everything they thought they knew. The search for Emily Gardner intensified with each passing hour. Law enforcement, joined by dozens of volunteers, worked tirelessly combing nearby forests, riverbanks, and open fields. Helicopters flew low over the hills, and tracking dogs followed scent trails that ended abruptly at the edge of a gravel path behind the inn. Her disappearance had transformed from a tragedy to a full-blown mystery. People couldn't stop asking the same question: how could a newlywed vanish without a trace on her wedding night? Investigators began by retracing Emily's last known movements. Hotel security footage showed the couple entering the bridal suite just after midnight. There was no footage of Emily leaving. No one at the hotel remembered seeing her after that. Guests in nearby rooms reported no signs of a struggle, no shouting, no unusual sounds during the night. It was as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. Daniel Reeves was questioned again, and his account of the night remained unchanged. He claimed that Emily had been restless after the reception and said she wanted some air. According to him, she slipped out quietly around 1:30 a.m., promising to be back soon. When she didn't return after an hour, he said he began to worry. But instead of calling anyone or searching himself, he went to bed, assuming she might have stayed with a friend or gotten caught up in a conversation with a guest. His explanation seemed strangely detached. Officers found it difficult to believe that a man would sleep soundly on his wedding night while his new wife vanished. Daniel's lack of urgency raised subtle but growing suspicions. His phone records were pulled. They showed no outgoing calls or texts after Emily allegedly left. No attempt to reach her. No effort to alert authorities until staff forced the issue the next morning. Meanwhile, Emily's loved ones were growing desperate. Her parents flew in from Idaho, devastated and confused. Her best friend, Rachel, told police that Emily had confided in her just days before the wedding. She had doubts, Rachel said, deep ones. Emily had discovered a series of suspicious messages on Daniel's phone and had grown increasingly uneasy. Though she never went into detail, Rachel sensed something was wrong and urged her to postpone the ceremony. But Emily, ever the perfectionist, had dismissed the idea. Everything was already planned, and she didn't want to create a scandal. The day Emily disappeared, she had left her phone, purse, and shoes in the hotel suite. Her wedding dress was folded neatly over the chair, as if she had taken it off carefully. Her overnight bag was untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, but the stillness of the room disturbed investigators. It didn't feel like a bride had walked out willingly into the night. The town of Ashfield, once bubbling with joy over the wedding, now buzzed with unease. People began to murmur in grocery store lines and church pews. Candlelight vigils were held in the park. Posters with Emily's face appeared everywhere. Still, there was no solid lead, no credible tip, and no one had seen her alive since the night of the wedding. Then, nearly 10 days after her disappearance, a park ranger discovered something unusual in the woods just a few miles from the inn. Tucked beneath some rocks and branches was a torn piece of fabric stained with blood. Investigators rushed to the scene. A forensic team collected the evidence, and within days tests confirmed it was part of Emily's wedding dress. This changed everything. Now the case was no longer being treated as a disappearance. It was officially a suspected homicide. The area around the discovery was cordoned off. More pieces of fabric were found nearby, along with faint drag marks in the dirt. Still, no body. The forest was dense and cold at night, making search efforts slow and grueling. Investigators turned their attention back to Daniel. They dug deeper into his background. On paper, he appeared spotless, no criminal record, no history of violence, and glowing professional references, but financially things looked different. Bank statements revealed large transfers between accounts, some linked to offshore holdings. His credit cards were maxed out. The clean-cut image began to crack. Detectives obtained additional surveillance footage from the hotel. One camera, located in a service hallway not usually monitored closely, showed Daniel dragging a large, dark duffel bag down the corridor at 2:30 a.m., 40 minutes after he claimed Emily had left the room. He returned alone, empty-handed? When confronted with the footage, Daniel gave a vague response, saying he was moving laundry and old decorations from the reception. But the timeline didn't make sense, and his reluctance to clarify only deepened suspicions. Police obtained a warrant to search his car. Inside the trunk, beneath a blanket, they found traces of blood later confirmed to be Emily's. Carpet fibers from the hotel suite matched those found in the duffel bag retrieved from a trash bin near the forest's edge. The image of a heartbroken husband began to crumble. Public sentiment shifted overnight. Comment sections once filled with sympathy turned cold. Friends who had offered comfort now distanced themselves. The media began calling it the wedding night disappearance, and as more details came to light, the story turned darker and more disturbing. Emily was no longer a missing bride. She was now the likely victim of a calculated, carefully executed betrayal. What was supposed to be the happiest night of her life had become the last, and the man who had vowed to protect her stood at the center of a growing storm. Daniel Reeves remained outwardly calm even as suspicion wrapped tightly around him. In the weeks following Emily's disappearance, investigators slowly built their case, layer by layer. Each piece of evidence pointed to a deeper, darker truth than anyone had initially imagined. What had begun as a hopeful search for a missing bride had turned into a hunt for a killer hiding in plain sight. The discovery of blood-stained fabric in the woods shifted the momentum. Forensic analysis confirmed it belonged to Emily's wedding dress, and the blood was a match. This discovery triggered an intense re-examination of Daniel's every move before, during, and after the wedding night. Investigators returned to the hotel, going over overlooked footage, employee interviews, and cleaning schedules. They questioned every person who had seen the couple that day. Most recalled Emily smiling, laughing, full of life. Daniel, in contrast, was described as distant and stiff, not unusual, perhaps for a nervous groom, but strange in hindsight. Behind the scenes, detectives began reconstructing Daniel's financial history. On paper, he was a successful financial analyst. In reality, he was drowning in debt. Credit cards were maxed out, multiple accounts had been overdrawn, and he had taken out high-interest loans under false names. The deeper they looked, the more it became clear that Daniel had been living far beyond his means. He had presented himself as stable, but it was an illusion held together by lies and manipulation. Then came the biggest breakthrough. Investigators retrieved deleted files from Daniel's laptop, including a folder that had been recently erased days before the wedding. Inside were screenshots of conversations with another woman, a former coworker he had been romantically involved with. The messages painted a troubling picture. Daniel had told her that his relationship with Emily was temporary, and that he was only going through with the wedding because of financial convenience. He'd even joked about how expensive divorce could be, saying, "It's cheaper to end it early than drag it out later." But the messages weren't just careless talk. Investigators found detailed notes and web searches saved to his browser history about body disposal, cleaning crime scenes, and how long decomposition takes in various outdoor conditions. He had spent hours researching national parks, soil types, and how to avoid detection in remote areas. These were not the digital footprints of an innocent man, they were signs of a premeditated act. The theory became clear. Daniel had planned to kill Emily before the wedding even took place. Her growing suspicions in the days leading up to it may have sealed her fate. She had noticed something either in his behavior, his phone, or his financial records that pushed her to confront him. But Daniel couldn't afford for the wedding to be called off. A public breakup would expose him. He had built his life around the illusion of success and control, and if Emily pulled away, that illusion would collapse. Authorities believe that sometime after midnight on their wedding night, Daniel made his move. Emily may have fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's events. He would have had time to act without interruption. There was no sign of a struggle in the suite, no broken furniture or overturned lamps, which suggests it happened quickly and silently. After the act, Daniel wrapped her body in a sheet, placed it into a large duffel bag, and used the service hallway to avoid being seen. He then drove to the wooded area several miles away, where he buried her under rocks and leaves. When he returned, he carefully cleaned up, folded her dress, and staged the room to appear undisturbed. By the time hotel staff knocked the next morning, Daniel had rehearsed his version of the story. She went out for air and never came back. But despite his careful planning, Daniel underestimated the attention the case would receive. Emily was not just another missing person. She was beloved in her community, and the tragic timing of her disappearance, the night of her wedding, captivated national media. What might have stayed local became national news. Every detail was picked apart. When police finally arrested Daniel, it came after days of surveillance and silent observation. They wanted to be sure they had enough. The moment he was placed in cuffs, he didn't resist or protest. He simply looked at the officers, then turned his eyes to the ground. It was the first time his mask visibly cracked. Inside the interrogation room, Daniel remained mostly emotionless. He denied everything at first, repeating that Emily left on her own and he had no idea what happened to her. But the weight of the evidence soon cornered him. The footage, the messages, the searches, the blood, all of it painted a picture he could no longer escape. The confession came late one evening after hours of questioning. It was quiet and almost clinical. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He admitted what he did in cold. Factual language, providing the final puzzle pieces of how he had planned it, how he carried it out, and where he had left her. It wasn't a moment of guilt. It was a release of a secret he no longer had the strength to keep. What struck investigators the most was the lack of remorse. It was as though Daniel saw the entire situation not as the destruction of a life, but as a failed strategy. Emily had become an obstacle in his path, and in his mind, removing her had been a solution. There was no apology, no regret, just silence and then a final statement. It had to be done. After Daniel Reeves confessed to the murder of Emily Gardner, the town of Ashfield fell into collective disbelief. Though suspicion had been mounting, the confession hit like a blow to the chest. It was no longer speculation, no longer an unfolding mystery. It was real. A young bride had been murdered hours after saying, "I do," and the man who had placed the ring on her finger was the one responsible. Police wasted no time organizing a team to locate Emily S.'s body based on Daniel S.'s admission. He provided a detailed description of the burial site, leading investigators to a secluded area in the forest reserve a few miles from the hotel. It was a place Daniel had researched in advance, chosen for its isolation and lack of foot traffic. A trail off the main path led to a shallow grave covered with branches and rocks. What they found there confirmed his story. Emily's body was wrapped in the sheet from the hotel suite, still dressed in part of the wedding attire she had designed herself. The scene was both devastating and surreal. The image of her lifeless form, so recently vibrant and full of joy, silenced even the most seasoned officers. Forensics confirmed the cause of death as strangulation. There were no defensive wounds suggesting she had been attacked while unconscious or in her sleep. The calculated nature of the act added a chilling layer. There was no sign of hesitation, no second thoughts. News of the discovery traveled fast. Emily's parents, who had held on to the hope that she might be alive, were inconsolable. Their daughter's life had been extinguished in a moment of selfish calculation, and no explanation could undo that truth. Her friends, still reeling from the wedding, now found themselves planning a funeral. The community, once bright with wedding excitement, now dimmed under the shadow of mourning. The court proceedings began swiftly. Daniel's confession removed the need for a lengthy investigation, but the trial was still necessary for sentencing. During the pretrial phase, new details emerged that painted an even more disturbing picture of Daniel's motives. His financial troubles were worse than previously thought. He had borrowed against fictitious accounts, stolen identities, and was facing quiet pressure from creditors. He had also lied to Emily about his job. While he claimed to be a financial analyst, he had been let go months earlier and was living off borrowed money. Emily had unknowingly become part of the facade. She believed she was marrying a stable, supportive partner. In truth, she had become the final piece in Daniel's crumbling empire of deception. With Emily's growing popularity, the boutique's profits rising, and her image spotless, Daniel saw the marriage not as a union of love but as a strategic gain. When she began asking questions and showing doubts, she threatened to destroy the lie he had spent years crafting. In court, Daniel sat expressionless. As the prosecution laid out the sequence of events, there was no visible emotion. Witnesses gave statements, recounting memories of Emily's joy and light in the days before the wedding. Rachel, Emily's best friend, delivered a statement that left the courtroom in tears. She spoke about the moment Emily had tried to laugh off her fears, brushing aside concern for the sake of moving forward. She regretted not pushing harder, not asking more questions. The prosecution didn't need theatrics. The evidence was clear, overwhelming, and damning. The confession, digital footprint, surveillance footage, financial records, and motive left no doubt. Daniel's defense team, with little room to maneuver, avoided trying to deny the crime. Instead, they focused on mental health, claiming that stress and psychological instability led him to snap. But the cold, methodical steps Daniel had taken betrayed any notion of a temporary lapse. The jury was unmoved. After a brief deliberation, the verdict came back, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, in a powerful closing statement, described Daniel's actions as the ultimate betrayal, premeditated, remorseless, and executed with a chilling calm. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom, there was no protest, no reaction, just silence. In the weeks following the sentencing, the community tried to heal. A memorial was erected in the town square in Emily's honor, surrounded by flowers, sketches of her designs, and heartfelt notes. Her boutique remained closed, but her parents donated her final collection to a domestic violence charity. Her memory became a symbol not just of beauty and creativity, but of a tragic reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Emily's story was picked up by national media, and documentaries soon followed. Each retelling carried the same weight, a cautionary tale of charm, control, and the darkness that can hide behind a calm smile. But for those who knew her, the headlines and specials never quite captured who she really was. She wasn't just the bride who vanished. She was a woman who lived fully, loved fiercely, and trusted too easily. And in the end, it was that trust so freely given on her wedding night that cost her everything. In the aftermath of Daniel Reeves' sentencing, the town of Ashfield was left with a silence that felt heavier than grief. The story of Emily Gardner's wedding night murder had traveled far beyond the quiet Oregon town, landing on national headlines and haunting every conversation. But for those who had known her not as a news story, but as a real person, the trial's conclusion did not bring peace. Justice, while served, could never replace the vibrant young woman whose life had been stolen in such a deliberate, devastating way. Emily's funeral was held on a soft, overcast morning just 3 weeks after her body had been recovered. The same guests who had danced at her wedding now gathered in black, their faces marked by sorrow and disbelief. Her parents walked slowly behind the casket, supported by relatives, barely able to lift their eyes from the ground. The church overflowed with mourners. Floral arrangements stood in stark contrast to the grief in the air, their color and beauty a cruel reminder of the life Emily had once filled with joy and light. In the months that followed, the community began efforts to preserve Emily's memory in meaningful ways. Her boutique, which had remained closed since the day she vanished, was transformed into a community space dedicated to women's empowerment and safety. Shelves that once held dresses now held pamphlets on recognizing emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and the signs of controlling behavior. Workshops were hosted there, and survivors shared their stories in her honor. Her name became more than a headline. It became a symbol of awareness, caution, and hope for others. Despite the outward movement toward healing, the deeper questions remained. How had no one seen the warning signs? Why hadn't Emily's fears before the wedding been taken more seriously? How could someone like Daniel, who seemed so calm, so gentle, commit such a calculated crime? These questions lingered, unanswered, settling like fog over those left behind. Daniel, meanwhile, began serving his sentence in a maximum security prison. Inside those walls, he lived out each day under the constant weight of the crime he could never undo. Reporters attempted to reach him, to understand what had driven him to such a cold act. He refused every interview. No further explanation ever came. The courtroom confession remained the only account of what happened and why a lifeless explanation for a life taken. Over time, details about Daniel's past surfaced through independent investigations and podcasts that sought to dig deeper. It turned out that Daniel had a history of small-scale cons and deceitful relationships. Former colleagues came forward with stories of manipulation, missing money, and unethical behavior. An old roommate recalled how Daniel once created a fake identity to impress a woman he was dating, going so far as to fabricate business cards and job titles. It had never escalated to violence before, but the pattern was clear. Daniel was obsessed with control, and he feared being exposed more than anything else. Emily, tragically, had stumbled too close to the truth. As she began to uncover inconsistencies in his finances and behavior, her instincts kicked in. She knew something was wrong. But the momentum of the wedding, the pressure, the expectations, the public image kept her moving forward. She never imagined the cost of asking too many questions could be her life. Emily's parents, devastated but determined, channeled their grief into advocacy. They created a foundation in her name, focusing on educating young women about emotional manipulation and financial abuse, areas often overlooked in traditional relationship counseling. Their goal was to make sure no one else would find themselves trapped in the same illusion Emily had trusted. Their pain became their mission. The story of Emily Gardner remained in the public consciousness for years. True crime documentaries recounted every twist and turn. Social media flooded with tributes each year on her birthday and the anniversary of her death. Her wedding photos, once shared with pride and joy, became haunting reminders of how quickly happiness can turn into tragedy. And yet, for all the darkness, there were flickers of light. Survivors who watched her story unfold reached out to the foundation, sharing how Emily's experience helped them escape dangerous relationships. A college student spoke about canceling her engagement after recognizing signs of control, eerily similar to those in Emily's case. A young mother left her emotionally abusive partner, saying she couldn't stop thinking about the bride who never got the chance to grow old. Emily's story didn't fade away. It endured, not just as a warning, but as a call for awareness. People began talking more openly about coercion, control, and the many invisible forms of abuse that can exist behind seemingly perfect relationships. Her death, though unspeakably cruel, sparked conversations that had been long overdue. What happened on Emily's wedding night would always be remembered as a betrayal beyond comprehension. But the legacy that followed was not only one of sorrow. It was a legacy of strength. Through every candle lit in her honor, every woman who found her voice, and every mind changed by her story, Emily Gardner lived on not as a victim, but as a voice echoing through silence, reminding the world that even the most beautiful moments can hide unthinkable danger, and that love, real love, never needs to be survived.